So just a very warm welcome to everyone. This is the tutorial number 7 for credit risk and credit as an asset class. I got a few things today to tell you, which I think are either very interesting or important or both. I'm going to start with I actually prepared some remarks on Argentina last time. I want to just share with you the story there. You can see these topics up here. All of them are relevant to your course in one form or another. And this is real finance practice. I guarantee you every single one of these topics, if you want to be in credit at some point in your career, you will come across them sooner than you think. Okay. Now, so this page is important. Okay. So I made this because I realized now we are coming to the end of the term. In fact, the end of your program, your state, the end of my involvement with you in a few weeks, and the lectures after today, we are going to meet with Ryan 3 more times, but only one of them will take place normally at the normal place and time and day, which is Friday. That is this coming Friday, okay? And then we have another class in precisely 1 week in this location, actually. And then after that, we meet him one more time the week after, also on a Sunday, but that will be Sunday afternoon, okay, at 2:30. Now, I think they have actually booked a room. I need to find out where. It's very likely to be somewhere here. Okay, I'm almost certain of that. I don't know where, but we'll let you know. Now, as far as tutorials are concerned, so the reason we do this is you don't have to come in on Saturday. So I thought I was making it convenient for both of us. But maybe it's, some people have a technical issue to get up at 8 o'clock in the morning. But I think I'm going to repeat this. Okay, so next week we will again. So we do this, okay, and then we do this. So it'll be a bundle. I just think that's easier for everyone because you have to come in anyway. Okay, and then. For the tutorial on Saturday, June the 2nd, I'm going to again split you guys up into 2 sessions, T1 and T2. And the reason for that is we're going to do the presentations on that day. So we need to have 16 people in one of them and 16 people in the other. Now, if you're not sure whether you are in T1 or T2 or which session you should go to, I will send you a confirmation because I know who belongs to which team and so on. And I know that some of you are in the behavioral finance. I'm aware of all those things, okay? So I will let you know, but you have to come to one of the 2, okay? And then we will meet again for the last time. Now, this would be a Wednesday. This will be a Wednesday morning. I just want to meet you one last time. This tutorial, my tradition. I try to give you some kind of a roundup or summary before the exam. It doesn't mean I'll tell you what's in the exam, okay? I manage your expectations very carefully. But I want to, it's up to you whether you want to come or not, okay? As is always the case, including today. But I hope you will come. So we'll give you, I'll give you a, what's the word? Briefing, okay? I'll give you a briefing just prior to your exam, which is when? Which is on the, oh, hold on. Is June the 3rd a Wednesday? What? Hmm? Oh yeah, why did I write that? What I meant was June the 6th. Okay? So my apologies. I mean June the 6th. I really mean Wednesday. We could, I mean, look, we could actually have a tutorial instead of the 6th of June. We could do it on June the 3rd in the morning. The only problem with that is then I give you a tutorial before Ryan has finished delivering his material. And if there's something I want to say to you regarding the exam, I'm not able to. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah, but if I just wait till he's completely done and then we meet, I could do either, but okay, so that's the plan for now. One more thing to let you know. Ryan has given me some new lecture material. I'm so sorry, he gave it to me this morning. I don't mean to blame him, it's a fact, okay? He sent it to me and then it's up on Blackboard now. So there's some more stuff on Blackboard. Now, I want to share with you some interesting things about Argentina. But before I do that, I actually want to go to I received a question. You might want to just take a quick minute reading that. It is a little bit long, but just take a minute reading it, okay? So those of you who came a little bit late, they told me the aircon will be on at 9 o'clock. Okay, now this question is regarding the general topic of securitization. Question number one, how does the originator establish an off-balance sheet SPE? Now, there are different names to it: special purpose vehicle, special purpose entity. Okay, so how does the originator establish an off-balance sheet SPV? By injecting less than 20% of equity, because if it is higher than 20%, parent has to use equity method consolidation so SPE will appear on balance sheet of the originator. Do you guys, first of all, understand this question? It's almost practically a kind of accounting type question. which is not my strongest point. Now, the second question, in securitization, SPE is totally independent from originator, so its financial performance will only show on the footnotes of the originator, I guess. Yes, that is correct. That is true. Well, a general comment for question one is that, yes, it's true. The less your involvement in terms of equity, the less your involvement in the special purpose entity, then the more likely that it would not be consolidated. So I think it really depends on different accounting standards. But if you have a tiny amount or zero equity in an SPE, then obviously they don't feature significantly in your consolidated performance. What about off-balance sheet cases like SPE for infrastructure project financing? Now, this is actually a little bit different. If the parent's equity is less than 20%, only showing footnotes, between 20, show an IS and BS more consolidated, because I saw two kinds of. I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this question, but I go back to my earlier comments. What I can say to you, all right, is that if you look at the kind of securitization that Ryan has been teaching you, it's mostly, based on what? Structured credit. So we're not really touching on project finance, which actually is a very, very interesting topic. Did you guys do anything in this program on project finance at all? Is there another course? Do you know what project finance means? Okay, now, if you talk to finance people, they and you talk about structured finance, okay, they will understand this to mean one of several things. So it can either be securitization. It can be structured credit. Structured credit are things like the deals that Ryan has been showing you, when maybe the originator, you put in a little bit of equity, and then they leverage it up, or they repackage some bonds. Today, if you look in Blackboard, for lecture number 8, there is a deck of slides called Credit Link CLO, okay, or CL, sometimes credit link loans, okay. This is an example of structured credit. So securitization would be something like, mortgage-backed securities is the most typical example. You guys have talked about that, okay. Credit cards, student loans. And then there is another discipline called project finance. Now, what is that? And this is something we haven't really talked about in this course, and I don't think we will. That is when you need to build a power station, a highway, you need to build an airport or seaport, stuff like that. Okay, so you build some big infrastructure or public utility project, and quite often these are the way they finance these things. Okay, is on a sort of standalone basis. Okay, so the credit analysis and the cash flows and the financing are actually quite different from your traditional 7-Eleven or your GM or your Alibaba and this and that, because you have just a project to run, okay, and you are financing that. So someone has to, provide the money. So the investor will have to come with some equity, $100 million, but the other $500 million has to come from the bank. So the bank is saying, all right, well, what have you got to show for it? Where are your cash flows? We don't have any. Okay? We haven't built a thing yet. Okay? So all of those things have to be taken into account. So project finance actually is a very interesting topic. But it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop there. Project finance. So the nature of credit risk participation for project finance is quite different again, and frequently they also make use of off-balance sheet techniques. So if the project fails, that's it. Okay, you can't chase up anyone else, and that's one of the key rationales for having SPVs. Now, the other thing I thought about was leasing of aircrafts and big vessels, like oil tankers, those things. Okay, so you are China Airlines and you want to buy some aircrafts. You haven't got any money. Okay? The aircraft they cost like $250 million for one aircraft. So you're going to borrow some money from HSBC. They're going to ask you, okay, if you guys go bankrupt, what do I do? Okay. Or there are different structures to finance. So maybe they can set up an SPV. So the SPV buys all the aircrafts and then would have a leasing contract with the airline. All of those things. So they all come under the umbrella of structured finance. Now, Ryan mostly is focusing in this department, sometimes here, okay, but we haven't really talked about this, okay. But what I can say is that project finance often are funded with special purpose vehicles. And let me, so obviously when you are funding something with a separate company, one of the purposes is what they call is bankruptcy remote. That is the term. Bankruptcy remote means if that project fails or if that SPV fails, you can't actually chase up anybody else. The responsibility will stop as soon as the equity is exhausted. Okay. Now, we often mention tax benefits, but are they for SPE or parent? Ultimately, if you take a step back, if you have a lot of money and you decide you want to build an airport, if you want to build a power station, is a more realistic example. So imagine you have a lot of money, you want to build a power station, and your financial advisors they tell you that the best way to do that is to set up an SPV. Now, who benefits in the end? You think about it. Who benefits? You benefit. Okay? You benefit via the SPV. So the SPV, you get a tax optimization. The shareholders of the SPV benefit. But who are the shareholders? You own the shares. Okay? Maybe you own another company that owns the shares. So ultimately, directly or indirectly. But what I actually want to add to this is some background on securitization, and I think after I do that, you will actually either be able to answer this question, or you may not think it is so important. Okay. Now, what I mean by that is, and I particularly I'm thinking of this department here. Okay. So when you have, it's a little bit like this. What's that? That's not the letter F. That's a balance sheet. Okay. Now, I think when you look at balance sheets, and we do that, 100 times a week. This was invented a long time ago, double entry accounting by Italians, I think. Now, balance sheets are used everywhere. Anytime you run a business, in fact, you don't even have to run a business. Everyone has a balance sheet. You have a balance sheet. I got one. Okay. It's a little bit like music. So I don't know how familiar you are with music theory. You know how you got do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do? Okay. Very, very simple. Just 7 notes. But the amount of variation from that is infinite. You got jazz, you got blues, you got pop, classical. Okay, it's been going on for 1,000 years. This is the same. Okay, so balance sheet, so simple. Assets, liability, equity. So everyone knows that. But it is really when you look at I think the intention behind a particular structure that you start to understand, oh, there are a lot of different variations, okay? So of course, when you run a big corporation, you have a balance sheet. When you run an SPE, you still have a balance sheet, okay? There's asset, there's liability, there's equity, but the intention behind it is very, very different, okay? So when you run a big bank, they have huge balance sheets, and so there's the asset side and there's liability. Now, that, so part of that are the mortgages, for example. So I'll use mortgage as an example, okay? And of course, so when banks, they lend money to you to buy a house, okay? This has to be funded, and the way they fund that, there are several ways. Of course, there is the bank deposits, which is the best. It's almost like free money, okay? But you can also have interbank loans, okay? That is a big market. That is the so-called money market. Or you can even issue bonds, okay? You can have a hybrid, like CoCos and all of those things. But in any case, the thing that bothers bankers more than anything else is when you have some assets here on the left-hand side, the regulators require you to have a certain amount of capital set aside, equity capital. And this part they don't like, okay? Because these days, capital is very, very expensive. It's almost like real estate. It's extremely, at least for European banks, certainly the case, okay? So they have a limited, including the bank that Ryan works for, okay? They have limited capital and it's all a question of optimizing. So they don't like, in other words, they don't have an excessive appetite to lend a lot of money for whatever reason. Okay, corporate, mortgage, student loans, car loans, personal loans. Okay, are you all with me so far? Yeah, everything is okay with that. Now, so what they do is, so they cut out this bit. They cut that out. And then that means they don't need this anymore. So imagine this part just disappeared. And then it now comes down and you set up. So these are all the mortgages. These are all the mortgages. Mortgage, okay. Now this becomes the SPV. And then on the back of that, of course, somebody else will need to finance it. So this is when you issue as mortgage-backed securities. Mortgage-backed securities. Now, I now go back to the question. So these structures quite often are standalone. So you have one SPV for one particular issue, and there will be there's mortgage-backed. So there will be there's like a senior tranche. There is a junior tranche or a subordinated tranche, or there is an equity tranche. Okay, so on this side is all the mortgages. The thing to understand is now you don't really look at this the way you would look at a typical big bank or a typical company of any kind. Okay, this is a smaller special purpose entity serving a specific purpose, which is to have dedicated mortgage assets on one side and nothing else, okay? And then on the other side, there are securities issued for investors with a limited lifetime. Now, the equity here, sometimes the banks will participate, okay? So they have a little bit of equity in there, but my experience is that most of the time, I think they rather don't have it, okay? Or the purpose is not to be a big equity participant for the bank, okay? Are you with me there? So let's say, and this is more fitting to, I guess, the U.S. culture of they're really, they're the most advanced, and they do this. It's a big market for them. So if you're in the U.S. And you borrow some money from Bank of America to buy a house, okay? They lend you some money. They can turn around and sell that mortgage or package it with 1,000 other mortgages. They can package that into a special purpose vehicle and on-sell that to investors. And you know what? You wouldn't even know about it. And you don't care either, okay? You don't know and you don't care. And I'll explain how that works in a moment, okay? So the equity participation here is not really the focus for the originator. The originator is the bank, okay? I have never really felt that the equity part in an SPV is a key focus for the originator. They would rather just forget about it if they can, okay? Now, from my experience, okay, when big banks securitize, the equity piece is usually the hardest piece to sell to investors. No one likes it, okay? Oh shit, if I want this is so risky. If I want equity risk, I'll go to the equity market, okay? The equity piece here means if someone defaults, okay, you take the hit, okay? You earn more money, you earn more spread, although this is still a fixed income based transaction, okay? But no one likes the equity piece, which is why sometimes the bank will take it up. Okay, that's how the subprime crisis really kind of started 10 years ago. So banks, they were taking a lot of the equity risk, right? But another way for them to do this is the bank will take the equity risk of the SPV investment, and they will try to turn around and hedge it. They will try and hedge it with, they will try to hedge it using credit derivatives. Okay, so essentially they buy protection. And related to that, one of the biggest protection seller, one of the biggest companies offering credit protection on asset-backed securities. Do you know who that was? It's a big name. Very good, very good. Points for you, okay? Participation points. AIG, they nearly went bankrupt. Okay, so the whole thing. But anyway, so banks typically, they don't like the equity piece, but clients don't like it either. But in order for the whole transaction to fly, somebody has to take the equity risk. They just turn on the aircon. That's the first thing to say. Okay, so no one likes this. And banks will take this risk reluctantly, which was why I thought, this question regarding what is the what is the bank's attitude to or how do they treat a consolidated performance isn't really so important, because if ever they securitize something, the equity part never is a priority. They will try to cut that down to zero if they can. Now, it is to me, so the way I look at SPV is, do you know what is a shed? S-H-E-D. Do you know what that is? I'll tell you what a shed is. Anyone knows what a shed is? Did you see this Financial Times headline? I'll show you again later. A shed is, okay, look on the right-hand side. Okay, shed, a slight or rude structure built for shelter store. Okay, now I don't know how many of you are living in houses in China, okay, but in other countries where you live in a house, quite often you have a little backyard, and in your backyard you have a little wooden structure where you put all your tools. You put your hammers and your lawn mower, you put your chainsaw, your barbecue stuff in there, okay? That's called a shed, okay? Now, for me, SPV is kind of like a shed. Why do you have a shed? You put all the stuff that you normally don't want to care about in there, okay? Just leave it there. It's yours, okay? But you want your home, okay? Your house to be neat and tidy and clean, okay? All the other stuff you don't touch, just put it somewhere else and you just look at it when you need it. For me, I think an SPV is, or securitization, is a little bit like that. It's yours, but it's somewhere else. You know what I'm saying? Yeah? And another thing I can say about this is, okay, now, of course, when a bank lends money for mortgages, all right? When they do that, now what is the benefit? The benefit is you get fees, or you get income, okay? You get income, but the cost is, well, there are two costs. First of all, there's the credit risk. and you need to have capital to back it up. Okay, cost of capital. Now, this income, I'll tell you one more thing, and then I'll stop about this. So the income, obviously there is a spread. There's a spread income. A spread income, it means, so you are lending, you are borrowing at LIBOR, and you are lending at LIBOR plus 150. Okay, so your income is 150 basis points. Okay, so there's the now there is another thing called mortgage servicing rights. Okay, so now I tell you a bit more extra detail. Okay, so when you are borrowing, when you are lending money and you are earning 150 basis points, quite likely 125 would be for the credit risk. Okay, the credit spread. And then the other 25 basis points would be for what we call mortgage servicing rights. Now, what are mortgage servicing rights? So I just told you the example earlier, right? When you, if you are a customer, you go to Citibank, you borrow a mortgage, okay? So they have to, fill in all the forms and process all the documents and check your IDs, and then every month they have to collect your interest. Issue statements for you, keep the accounting, and if you don't pay up, they have to send letters or send someone knocking on your door. All of those things, mortgage servicing. Okay. Now, when you securitize, what happens? What happens is you give this up, you get rid of that. You get rid of this, you keep this, okay? Because you facing the client, the customer on the street, you are still the lender, even though you sell your mortgage. So like I said, they don't care, they don't know, okay? So you get to keep part of the income. But now you don't have any capital cost, you don't have any credit risk. So the idea of securitization really is very, very sound. The idea is good. I've always, and I would argue with you until midnight, the idea is good. Okay, the idea is wonderful. So the credit crisis that started 10 years ago is that people took it to the extreme, and there was a lot of mispricing. There was a lot of sloppy standards with, credit analysis and also credit rating agencies, but the concept of securitization, I will stand by that any day. Okay? Is everyone okay with that? Just try to share with you the industry knowledge. So I hope you get a better understanding of how securitization works. Okay? Now, if you're okay, I think last week I promised that I will share with you interesting case of Argentina. Now, this was a couple of weeks back, if you recall. They so a couple of weeks back. Is there a date on this? No. They tried to. So the Argentinian peso was falling very fast, and then they tried to support it by pushing up interest rates to 40%. That's just crazy. And I said it would. I said at the time it's not going to work. Okay, and it hasn't. So now the next step, they have called in the IMF, and they are going to borrow some money from the IMF. Yeah, I was going to show you this. So if you have $150,000 lying around, and some of you might, okay, you get a chance to meet Donald Trump. But what I was going to show you. Why Argentina has returned to the IMF in charts. You see, you have to keep an eye out for these things because financial crises, usually they start with emerging markets, and it usually is just one spot somewhere far away, and then the whole world, it catches fire. That's how crises usually start. Now, let me just I think I played this last time, but we can do that again. It's only a couple of minutes. This is the IMF chairperson, Christine Lagarde. They're seeking 30 billion US from the IMF. So the Argentina had a financial crisis around the turn of the millennium, 16 years ago, when they had financial difficulties at that time, and they also called in the IMF to help them. The problem was the measures taken by the IMF were so severe that it ended up pushing the economy into a serious recession. Now, I want to mention this point because I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Okay, very interesting case, and very relevant, by the way, to credit and credit derivative and sovereign credit risk. Okay. So they defaulted in 2002. And there was a 20% unemployment. Okay, so they have an election next year. I might actually play. Might play one more. I'm curious about. Let's see how long this is. Argentina peso tumbles to new low despite IMF talks. Oh, this is an article. I thought it was a video. I think these are all articles, related articles. Okay, never mind. Now, what I want to share with you today, I wanted to do this last week. So the background was that around the turn of the millennium, 16 years ago, So Argentina was in financial difficulties, and so this shortly after the Asian financial crisis. So they called it the IMF and asked the IMF to help. And the IMF, the measures they took were very, it would always be, I think, well, not always, but it's often the same stuff that you've heard, which is cut government spending, cut this benefit, cut that, and raise taxes. Okay, so cut benefits, raise taxes, back up interest rates. So everything to restore the country's balance sheet, back to some kind of solvency if you have gone bankrupt. But it will push it ends up pushing your economy so far down the toilet that it may even take you longer to recover. So in the end, what happened was in I think 2002, Argentina defaulted on their debt, including some of their US dollar bonds. So they borrowed money in US dollars, and I think it was 2002, they defaulted on that. And this is a case that I'm going to introduce to you now. Okay, it has sometimes been called trial of the century because it got a lot of attention. And I think if you want to be a credit investor or credit analyst, you certainly should know, you should be familiar with what happened here, because the story is not only interesting, but you get to learn something from it. Okay, it's a case, I think, of in Chinese we have a saying, don't we? See how good my Chinese is. Okay. How to write, yeah? Is that right? Okay, you know the meaning of this. Right. I think this story is an interesting case of this happening. Now, so they defaulted 17 years ago on their debt, including some US dollar bonds. And so what they did was 4 years later, they negotiated with most of the bondholders of that US dollar bond to have a restructure. Now, by the way, so Ryan told you about the credit events. If you remember, when you are doing credit derivatives, there is this thing called credit event. And for corporations, okay, obviously one of the credit events is they go bankrupt. Okay, for a country, that's not possible. Okay, but for countries, countries cannot liquidate and sell all their assets, although they come pretty close sometimes, but they don't wind down and resolve the way a company do. Okay, but if you restructure your debt in the credit derivative world, that counts as a credit event, and it is you can claim compensation on that. So they had a restructure. Restructure often means, sorry, I can't pay you now, or so today is when I should pay you $100. I don't pay you $100. How about I pay you, let's say, 30, okay? And then for the other 70, I will give you another bond for another 15 years or something. Now you might think, well, that's a crap deal. I don't want to take it. Well, you don't have to take it, okay? But it's a matter of negotiation. Sometimes it's take it or leave it. Those guys don't have any money. What do you want to do? Point a gun at their head? They don't have money. That's it, okay? So they restructured, and 76% of bondholders actually agreed. So the other 24%, they were still hesitating. So 5 years later, you see, this took 10 years almost, okay? So defaults are messy. Defaults are messy, which is why when you are doing credit derivative and you have a credit default swaps, and which is why people use that, what do they call it? Auction. Remember we talked about that? The CDS auction to fix the price, 3 to 6 months after the event. Otherwise, you're going to be waiting 9 years, and it's still not done. Okay. Now, here is when it gets interesting. 7% of bondholders refuse to accept the restructure package. Okay. They said, no, we don't want to be paid $30 plus another 15-year bond. We don't want that, okay? We want to be paid right now, 100, okay? And these were, I think, actually, they were hedge funds. And it is, I don't know exactly when they bought the bonds, but it seems that they bought them round about the time when Argentina was already in financial difficulties, possibly even after they defaulted. I don't know the exact point. So they bought them cheap, okay? They bought them maybe at 25% or something, possibly thinking that, I mean, this is what distressed debt trading is all about, okay? If you have, maybe you've heard of it, distressed debt trading. So everything has a price. Like I said to you, if you buy a bond at 100 and the company defaults, normally you're not going to end up with zero. Okay, it can be quite exciting. So the range can be from 0 to 100, and if the defaulted bond is trading at 10. And you think it's worth 15, you've made 50% return, okay? So these hedge funds were probably trading distressed debt. They bought them cheap, and they refused. They said, no, we want to be paid the entire amount, all right? So they sued the Argentinian government in 2012. Now, so what happened after that? First of all, this bond was issued under New York law. So here's an example of why when you issue a bond or when you are an investor, it is important to see under what jurisdiction this bond is issued in. So this was issued under New York law. So they went to court in New York, and these bondholders want to be paid, okay? And the funny thing was, actually in 2012, because the other bondholders had already agreed and they were given a new bond, okay? And Argentina wanted to pay coupons on these new bonds to these 93%. And the hedge funds sued them. They said, no, you got to pay us first. You have to pay us 100, you have to pay par to us, okay? Before you can pay coupons for the new bonds to the other 93%. So they went to court on that. And actually the court ruled in favor of the hedge funds. So Argentina lost. That's why I said 复 Okay? It's a little country, but it's a country. Okay? And they lost, and they could not pay interest on the restructured bonds, and they couldn't pay that $30 either, I don't think. Okay, until now, those hedge funds, they were called holdouts because they were holding out. They said, no, you pay me, okay, because you haven't settled your old debt, so you can't make payments to the new bonds or to the restructure. So the dilemma at the time was the holdouts wanted to be paid at full face value, but the other 93%, they agree that it's okay if you pay me this 30% and then you give me a bond, okay? The dilemma is between this and if they pay the 7% holdouts, they may actually have to pay the other 93%, the complete amount as well. They don't have that much money, okay? They can't pay everybody par. But if they pay par to the 7%, the other 93% can actually stand up and start claiming, okay, I want my par value back, okay? So that could actually trigger a massive claim on Argentina. The bonds they defaulted on was 100 billion. So they had to pay the holdout $7 billion, around $7 billion plus all the interest, okay, that were delayed. That they could just about handle, but they didn't have $100 billion to pay everyone, okay. So in the end, they could not issue that bond in 2012, okay. They could not issue that, or they couldn't pay. The bond was already issued. They could not pay the coupons on the 2012 bond. So guess what? They defaulted again, okay, in 2012. And this time it was called, what was it called? A technical default, okay. So in the future, if you hear that term, a technical default, this is one example. It's kind of like, well, I have money to pay you, but for some reason, for some technical reason, okay, I'm not able to. Or sometimes it's called a selective default. Okay, that's what they did. So eventually, they reached a settlement when they pay the holdouts in par. They did that. Argentina, they paid the holdouts in par. Now, you might wonder, why didn't the other 93% complain? Well, there was a deadline. I think December 2015. Okay, if you're going to sue, you have to do that before then. And I think they reached a settlement. On purpose, they delayed the settlement to after the deadline, so the other 93% wouldn't sue because they didn't know what was going on. Okay, and then after that, they were able to return to the international bond market. Okay. Now this is an interesting case. And then just March last year. This just shows you how brilliant credit rating agencies can be. Moody's upgraded Argentina's outlook from stable to positive. That was only 14 months ago. Look what's happening today. Okay? But anyway, so much for that. So in just a little over a year, it looks like they are going to go into another crisis. Now, although this is a very interesting story, what have we actually learned from it? That's the key point. Okay, have we learned something? So what are the what have we learned from it? I can think of a few things. Okay, first of all, if you and someday, okay, I bet that one or more of you here will become a fund manager in fixed income. Okay, so these are the things to keep in mind. Sovereign credit risk and corporate credit risk are quite different. So keep that in mind. Sovereign defaults are less frequent. Well, there are less countries in the world. There are only like 200 countries. Okay, so their defaults are not as frequent. Far more companies to invest in, but the resolution is also less predictable. You just don't know what's going to happen because politics gets in the way, and then cross-border legal disputes and sovereign issues. So it can be messy, and you don't know what you really. It's harder to predict what kind of recovery value you might get. Okay, and they don't liquidate like companies. Okay, you can't force them. You can't knock on the door or kick the door open and then seize the country. You can't do that. Although sometimes they get pretty close. So in the case of Argentina versus the hedge funds, okay, what really went wrong? In other words, can you repeat this? Next time you see a country defaulting, can you go in and buy their debt and then think that you're going to repeat this? Okay, that's really the million-dollar question. Okay, I think you can't, because I'm going to tell you what went wrong. Okay, what went wrong is because there was a negligence on the part of the lawyers drafting the bond document for Argentina. So you know when you issue a bond, you need a prospectus, right? So you need lawyers to draft that. Now, you all know what pari passu means, right? You know what that means? Pari passu is a Latin word for saying that every single bondholder needs to be treated equally. Okay, so when you issue a bond, let's say you are a company and you issue a bond, and there will be a sentence saying, this bond ranks, RANKS, ranks pari passu with all other senior unsecured obligations of this company. So that means all the bondholders are treated equal. Okay, pari passu means you are treated equal. Now, that's the problem. Pari passu means you can't pay 7% of the bondholders the full face value, and then you treat the other 93% different. You can't do that, okay? Because of the pari passu clause. Now, the other thing, collective action. That's where things went wrong. You know what a collective action clause is? Collective action clause is another clause normally in the bond document, which says that if we need to do something, for a restructure or delay coupon payments or whatever, as long as a certain percentage of bondholders agree, not everybody, let's say above 90%. Okay? As long as above 90% of bondholders agree to something, then we can do it. It doesn't matter with the other 10%. That's a collective action clause. Okay? And they would normally have that in the bond document, and they will tell you what the percentage is at the beginning. Okay? Now, in the case of Argentina, I know maybe you find this hard to believe. They forgot to put this in. They forgot to put the second clause in. Okay, that is why you had this court case. That's why the holders actually won. So I think in the future, if you become a bond investor, you look out for this. If it's not there, it may actually be a good thing. If you are thinking to do what they did, the hedge funds. Okay. So I wanted to share that with you. I think it's interesting. I think it has a lot of relevance to credit derivatives, to sovereign debt investment, and to default resolution, to the process of restructuring and also negotiations and so on. Okay. Do you have any questions? Feel free to ask me. Yes. What if you break the pari passu clause? Then some bondholders can sue you. That's their problem, but they will sue you. You have the right to sue them. Okay, so like I said, that was the key problem here when I said the dilemma is if you pay par to the 7% of the people, then the other 93% potentially, if they see that happening, they will also stand up and they will sue. They will say, I want my money back too. Okay. So on purpose, so there was actually a deadline where you can sue. And I think that the two parties, they actually kept rather quiet on what they will do or what they will not do until the deadline passed. So after the deadline passed, you can't sue anymore. But some people did actually sue before the deadline. Okay. Not too many, but some people did. And they had to pay, they had to be paid as well. Okay. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You sue the government in the jurisdiction, which is the jurisdiction where the bond was issued. So when you have a bond prospectus, it will say this bond is issued under New York law, or this bond is issued under English law. I think for US dollar bonds, for all these global issues, almost 70% of them are issued under New York law. The other 20% will be issued under English law. You can't say issued under American law because there are a lot of different. So for the US, it will be under New York law, but if it was in the UK, it's under English law. So you take them to court in New York. Correct. It's a good question. They have no jurisdiction on Argentina. Two things. Okay. So first of all, because it's issued under New York law, you have to start your proceedings in New York. Number one. Number two, the trustee or the custodian for this bond, I think it was either Wells Fargo or JP Morgan, which means they are the ones responsible for paying the coupons and giving out the cash. So they do have some jurisdiction because the court actually stopped those guys. Okay, don't pay. Okay, I order you not to pay. So you asked a good question. So the jurisdiction question is not so clear cut, but they certainly had jurisdiction over Wells Fargo or JP Morgan. Okay. Okay. We have 15 minutes left. I'm trying to think what else I can tell you. Okay. How do banks make money? Okay, this is something else that I think is worth spending a bit of time on. I actually wanted to ask you these two questions in the end. Do you think a higher interest rate environment or a lower interest rate environment is better for banks generally? If you're a banker, which one do you prefer to see? If you're a banker, do you prefer to see a flat yield curve or a steep yield curve? Now, these are really interesting questions that have practical implications. But okay, what was I saying? Okay, so here are just simple demonstration. So there are two banks here. Okay, so one of them made $4.5 billion profit. The other made a smaller profit. The revenue of Bank A was $7.5 billion, and the revenue of Bank B, revenue is just how much money you take in. Okay, you go to 7-Eleven, you buy a bottle of water, you pay $10. That's the revenue. That's not the profit. Okay, this might cost $6, and then there is the employee, the salaries, electricity, rent, and so on. Market cap $45 billion. So which bank do you think? Which bank is better managed? A or B? B. A made more money. A had much more revenue. That's the problem, isn't it? They had a lot of revenue, but they had $3 billion of cost. Do you know what that is called? There's a term for that. Sorry, revenue. Revenue. Do you know what this is called? Sorry? Profit margin. Then I don't know if profit margin is correct, but there's another term called the efficiency ratio. Now, I don't know if this is the definition. I just want to share with you the concept. Efficiency ratio is how much it costs you to make $1 of profit. Okay, so if efficiency ratio was like 60%, then it should be 1 minus then. It should be 1 minus. Efficiency ratio is, for every dollar of profit. And in fact, I have some data here I want to show you. Okay, so you can see that the efficiency ratio of Bank A actually is quite poor, and also the return on capital for Bank A is 10% because they made $4.5 billion over $45 billion, whereas the return on capital for Bank B is actually 20%. So don't think that just because big banks are making big profit, wow, okay, JP Morgan, wow, HSBC, $7 billion. These are big elephants. Big elephants need a lot of bananas, okay? So sometimes small banks, a Bank of Communication is pretty, it's well run, the one in Shanghai, for instance, can be better. This is, what is this? This is the efficiency ratio of, I'm trying to think which bank. I think these are all the banks. So yeah, as you can see, it's roughly around 60%. I like looking at these statistics. Now, if you look at the individual banks, JP Morgan, I don't know how they're ranking them, but you can rank by efficiency ratio maybe. Well, some are very efficient. Well, I mean, they have numbers like this because they don't really have a lot of employees, or because of the nature of the business they are running. But once you get to, the more well-known, well, I'll just sort by, okay, top 100 by asset size. Okay, I get it. Okay, ranked by asset size. Okay. So JP Morgan efficiency ratio was around 60%. You want this number to be as low as possible. Okay, a high ratio means you need a lot of effort to produce $1 of profit. So here you need 60 cents to produce $1 of profit. BOA. So you can see banks are not really not so efficient. HSBC 114. Can you see that at the bottom? What's going on there? So that means you need $1.14 to produce $1 of profit. That means you made a loss. Maybe for that year at least, okay? But normally it's somewhere around 60%, okay? Now, so how do banks make money? Well, mostly it's on interest margin. Mostly, that's what banks are for, okay? So you lend, you borrow cheaper, you borrow at LIBOR, and you lend at LIBOR plus 100, and you keep that 100 for taking the risk, okay? You make a loan to somebody, and then you lend it to them at a higher credit spread. And I have a question down there. Assume you need 8% of core equity tier 1 capital to back it up. Okay, what is the return on equity? I can really see this as a potential interview question, even for young guys like you. Okay? A question like that will immediately test and verify your knowledge on simple banking. Who can give me the answer to this? Who knows the answer? Okay, because Ryan is coming soon. Now, I can give you some real numbers. So you don't have to use real numbers. You can use percentages, but you're lending 100 million, and the regulation says you need to back it up with 8% of capital. Okay, so this is a loan. This is the capital you need. This is the capital requirement, and this is likely to be the minimum. Now, if you are able to make 100 basis points, by the way, they are lending, they are borrowing at LIBOR flat. Let's just say they are, okay? Then you make 100 basis points a year, so your profit per annum is this. What is your ROE? 12.5%. I think a bank would be happy with that kind of number. Banking business is tough these days. Okay? If you look at the banks, they report their return on equity as they need to. So you can go to Bloomberg or anywhere else, Google. You can look up league tables of their return on equity. I suspect it will be somewhere around. Good morning. Hi. We're just talking about return on equity. for banks. What do you think is the sort of average number these days for European banks? Is it somewhere in the low teens?
European bank is quite bad. It's
Quite bad.
it's actually maybe even 10% less. US bank is better, particularly after the Donald Trump reduction.
Right.
Actually, US bank is actually more than 10 now.
Right. Okay. Sorry to throw this question at you the moment you arrive. Yeah. So these numbers are realistic, okay, in a way. Okay, so I will leave it at that. Now, if you haven't signed in yet, so you can do that, and I'll just wrap it up, and then Ryan can take over.